My name is Grace Whitfold. I'm 31 years old, and the most defining moment of my life happened on a warm Saturday morning in June. Inside a courthouse packed with strangers, reporters, and a tension so thick it felt like another body in the room. I was sitting there, hands trembling under the table, when the judge cleared her throat and read something that sliced my world open. Case number 48-03-17. The plaintiffs, Mr. and Mrs. Henry and Maureen Whitfold, versus the defendant, Miss Grace Leanne Whitfold, in the matter of the disputed inheritance of the late Dr. Adrian Whitfold, in the sum of $5.7 million. Plaintiffs, Henry and Maureen Whitfold, my biological parents, the same people who abandoned me in a shopping mall when I was 5 years old, the one that I hadn't seen or heard from in 26 years. I stared at them across the courtroom, almost unable to believe they were real. My mother, slim, stiff, dressed like she thought we were at a small award ceremony instead of a lawsuit, refused to meet my eyes. My father kept glancing at me with something sharper than regret, more like entitlement, like I was holding something that belonged to him. My breath shook. My throat burned. My adoptive dad's name, Adrian, echoed in my chest like something sacred. He was the man who saved me, raised me, taught me how to laugh again. The man who used to kneel down to my tiny 5-year-old height and say, "No one will ever leave you again, Grace, not as long as I breathe." He kept that promise until the day he died 9 months ago. And now, the people who broke me were suing me for everything he left me. The betrayal tasted metallic, bitter. I kept replaying the moment the lawsuit first arrived in my mailbox, my hands shaking as I opened the envelope, expecting bills or boring legal updates, only to see their names typed in bold. I remember dropping the letter, my knees giving out, sinking to the floor because how could people who never wanted me suddenly want millions from me? The judge continued speaking, but everything blurred. My childhood flashed like someone was flipping through old photographs too fast. The mall, the screams, the police, the years of wondering why. And then, finally, the moment Adrian found me. I could almost hear the echo of his voice telling me everything would be all right. But looking at my biological parents across that courtroom, I knew nothing was all right. I leaned back in my seat, took one shaky breath, and said in my mind what I could never say out loud in that room. You didn't come back for me. You came back for money. If you're new to the channel, stick around because the truth behind what happened next shocked even the judge. That morning, as I sat in that courtroom, my story didn't begin there. It began 26 years earlier, on a day I still dream about, the day I learned what abandonment felt like. The memory hits in layers. Sound first. The echo of mall music, the buzz of shoppers, the hum of conversations blending together like a messy orchestra. I remember holding my mother's hand so tightly my fingers hurt. I was a small girl, wide-eyed, curious, always trying to impress my parents. I remember asking questions, talking too fast, hoping they'd look at me with even a fraction of the softness I saw in other parents' eyes. But that morning, something felt different. My mother kept staring at her phone. My father walked ahead like he didn't want anyone to know we were together. I kept pulling at my mom's sleeve, asking where we were going. She shushed me, irritated, whispering, "Grace, stop talking, just walk." I tried, I really did. But then we stopped in the middle of the mall by a colorful toy store, and something inside me bubbled up, pure excitement. I asked if I could go inside. My father gave a tight smile, the kind adults give when they don't actually mean it. "Go ahead," he said. "We'll be right behind you." I believed him. I walked in, pressed my hands to the shelves, stared at the little plastic animals and dolls with wonder. I turned around minutes later, ready to show my parents a stuffed lion that reminded me of a picture book I owned. But they weren't there. At first, I thought they were playing hide and seek. Then I thought maybe they stepped away to get something. Then I started calling their names. The toy store clerk tried to help me look around nearby aisles, but minutes turned to hours. Hours turned to police, and police turned to the realization that they weren't coming back. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand anything. Abandonment at that age is like a hole in the chest, small enough to hide at first, but it grows, stretching into every part of who you become. When the social worker came and picked me up, I remember clutching the stuffed lion I hadn't even bought. The clerk had given it to me for free, whispering, "You can keep it, sweetheart," with pity in his eyes that confused me. I didn't cry until that night when the social worker tucked me into a bed in a quiet foster home. I remember asking through my tears, "My mommy and daddy, when will they come back?" The woman paused for too long before answering. "I don't know, baby." They never did. A week passed, a month, then two, and then one afternoon the front door opened and a man walked in. A man with soft brown eyes, salt and pepper hair, and a warmth I felt instantly. That was Dr. Adrian Whitfold, the man who had no reason to choose me but did. The man who saw me sitting quietly on the sofa, clutching my lion, and knelt down to meet my eyes like I mattered. "Hi, Grace," he said with a gentle smile. "I hear you like stories." A small nod from me. "Well," he continued, "I love stories too, especially the ones where the main character finds her way home." I don't know what happened in that moment. Maybe destiny, maybe grace, maybe something beyond us both, but I trusted him. Instantly. 2 weeks later, he took me home. A real home. A home that smelled like cinnamon and old books. A home where he actually listened when I spoke. A home where my drawings were placed on the fridge instead of thrown away. He became my father in every way that mattered. So, sitting in that courtroom 26 years later, listening to my biological parents claim that they had every right to what Adrian left me, something inside me broke a little more. The judge called for opening statements, and my mother, Maureen, stood. Her voice, cold and rehearsed, echoed through the courtroom. "Your Honor, we are simply trying to reclaim what is rightfully connected to our family lineage. Though we were estranged, Grace is still our daughter by blood." I felt my jaw tighten. Estranged? That word is reserved for relationships where both parties walk away. I didn't walk away from them. I was left, forgotten, discarded. My attorney leaned toward me and whispered, "Stay calm. The truth is on our side." But calm was the last thing I felt. Then my father stood and added something that nearly made me gasp. "We tried to find her," he said, "for years, but Dr. Whitfold kept her from us. We were devastated when we lost her." I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. Lies. All lies. They weren't devastated. They weren't searching. They didn't even file a missing child report. They left me in a mall and went home. I knew it. The state knew it. The social workers' records knew it. Yet here they were, twisting the narrative like expert manipulators. As the judge asked my attorney to begin our side of the case, my heart pounded, because the truth was about to come out. The truth none of them knew, not even the judge. A truth Adrian told me just weeks before he died, and it was the reason the inheritance was so large, and why my biological parents suddenly reappeared after 26 years, the real reason they abandoned me. I opened my mouth to speak when the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, but before I could say a single word, the courtroom door burst open. A woman hurried in, holding a thick envelope and whispering something urgently to her assistant. The judge looked irritated, but when the assistant rushed forward and handed her the envelope, the judge's expression changed. She ripped it open, pulled out documents, and her eyes widened slightly, just enough for me to feel a cold shiver crawl over my skin. She looked up at me, then at my biological parents, then back at the papers. "This," she said slowly, "changes everything." She paused. "This concerns the true circumstances of the defendant's abandonment and the hidden financial motives behind it." My heartbeat thundered. My fingers went numb. She raised her head and said, "Grace Whitfold, you need to see this." The entire courtroom held its breath. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, because whatever was in those documents, it wasn't just about the lawsuit. It was about the day I was abandoned and the truth behind it. The judge slid the documents toward my attorney and said words that froze the room. This appears to indicate someone lied, and if what's written here is true, the real betrayal hasn't even been revealed yet. The room felt suddenly too small, like the walls were leaning in and the oxygen inside the courtroom had thinned. My attorney slid the documents closer, his brows narrowing as he scanned the pages. I watched his eyes move left to right, faster and faster, and the deeper he read, the tighter his jaw became. I wasn't breathing, not really. I was just frozen there, my palms clammy, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Even my biological parents looked confused. My mother straightened in her seat, her lips tightening as if she sensed the ground shifting beneath her feet. My father kept fidgeting with his wedding band, his eyes darting between the judge and the envelope that now sat between us like a time bomb. "Your Honor," my attorney said finally, voice low, "may we request a brief recess to review these documents thoroughly before proceeding?" The judge nodded, but her gaze stayed glued onto me, studying my reaction as if she already understood the storm these papers were about to unleash. When the gavel tapped and the courtroom began to empty, I felt like the floor was moving under me. My legs didn't want to cooperate. My attorney guided me out into the hallway, a long marble corridor that suddenly felt colder than any hospital I'd ever been in. He stopped near a bench and looked at me with concern. "Grace, before I explain anything, you need to prepare yourself." I swallowed hard. "For what?" He didn't answer, not immediately. Instead, he held the documents out to me. My hands trembled as I took the top page. It was an official-looking form, yellowed slightly with age. At first, the words didn't make sense. Then they hit me. Termination of parental rights, Henry and Maureen Whitfold. My stomach dropped. I blinked, rereading the date. It was 3 months before the day they abandoned me in the mall. 3 months, meaning they had already given up their rights. They didn't abandon me spontaneously. It wasn't a moment of panic or desperation. They had legally severed their ties to me before they even dropped me in that toy store. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would they fill this out and then still leave me like that? Why pretend it was accidental?" My attorney flipped to the next page. "That's where it gets complicated." The next document was a letter, typed, formal, stamped. It was from a law firm, not just any firm, but a firm that handled high net worth estate disputes. I felt a chill travel down my spine. The letter was addressed to my parents. It warned them that Adrian Whitfold, my adoptive dad, was listed to receive a portion of a pending settlement involving a medical patent, a settlement potentially worth tens of millions. "This letter," my attorney said, tapping it, "was sent 2 weeks before you were abandoned. It appears your biological parents were informed that Adrian was about to receive a major financial windfall, and 3 months before that, they had already signed away their rights to you." I stared at him, my throat tightening. "So, what does that mean?" He exhaled. "It means they didn't abandon you because they couldn't take care of you, Grace. They abandoned you because they thought Adrian was going to adopt you, because they believed he was about to become very wealthy. And if he did, having their child legally adopted by him could allow them to come back for financial gain." My head spun. "But they didn't know he'd actually adopt me." "No, it seems they expected him to. But when the adoption took longer than they hoped, they abandoned you anyway." I felt like the hallway floor was tilting. My adoptive father's name blurred in my vision. "Adrian, did you know? Did you understand why they left me?" I remembered the way he used to stroke my hair when I had nightmares, the way he whispered, "Some truths can wait until a heart is strong enough to carry them." Was this one of those truths? My attorney wasn't done. "There's something else, Grace." He pulled out a final page, a single sheet. This one wasn't a legal document. It was a handwritten letter. The signature at the bottom made my knees lock. It was Adrian's handwriting. My eyes burned. The world softened around the edges. I held it gently, as if it were a relic. The letter was addressed to me. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the truth is finally at your doorstep. I wanted to tell you sooner, so many times, but every time I looked at you, I saw a girl building herself up from the ashes someone else left behind. I didn't want my truth to be the match that burned you again. The day I met you in that foster home, I already knew who you were. My breath stopped. I knew your parents. They were not strangers to me, and they were not the people you believed they were. The hallway blurred. My heart slammed against my ribs. There is more, Grace, more than I could say in one letter, more than you ever deserved to carry alone. But I leave you this. What they did was not your fault. It never was. And the money they want now, it is not theirs. It was never meant for them. When the time comes, the truth will defend you. It always does, eventually. I love you. Always. Dad. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. My father had known my biological parents? But how? And why didn't he ever tell me? My attorney rested a hand on my shoulder. Grace, if this document is authentic, and it appears to be, then your adoptive father may have known your biological parents before you were abandoned. That changes everything. I wiped my eyes, breath shaky. What does it mean legally? Legally, he sighed, it means your biological parents may have abandoned you intentionally to manipulate the future inheritance. And if that's proven, not only will they lose the case, they could face charges. I stared at the court doors. My biological parents were inside that room acting like victims, acting like the world owed them something, acting like they were the ones who lost a daughter. But the truth was unraveling, and it was ugly. Before we returned to the courtroom, I forced myself to breathe deeply, to gather every piece of courage Adrian ever saw in me. When the judge called us back in, my parents looked smug, like they thought my silence meant weakness. But I wasn't weak, not anymore. I sat down, placed Adrian's letter on the table, and lifted my chin. My mother narrowed her eyes at me as if sensing the shift. My father swallowed hard. The judge cleared her throat. Ms. Whitfold, she said, I understand you have been given documents with new information. Is there anything you wish to say before we proceed? I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, my mother shot up from her seat like she'd been electrocuted. Your Honor, this entire envelope is fabricated. We never signed a termination of rights. This is all some trick to discredit us. The judge raised an eyebrow. The documents came directly from the State Archive, Mrs. Whitfold. My mother paled. My father looked like he might faint. My pulse thundered as the judge continued. However, there is a matter here that is deeply concerning. She lifted Adrian's letter between two fingers. The defendant's late adoptive father seems to have been in communication with individuals connected to the plaintiffs prior to the abandonment. My parents stiffened. Their reaction wasn't confusion, it was fear. Given the implications, the judge said, I am ordering a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding the defendant's abandonment. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. My parents' attorney tried to object, but the judge silenced him. Until this investigation concludes, she continued, the plaintiff's claim to the inheritance will be temporarily suspended. My mother's face twisted. This is unacceptable. That money... The judge slammed her gavel. That money is not yours. My father grabbed my mother's wrist, trying to quiet her, but she yanked away, shouting, We did what we had to do. He knew what he promised us, and now she's... She stopped abruptly, as if she'd revealed too much. The courtroom went silent. I stared at her, my pulse in my throat. What did he promise you? I whispered. My mother's eyes darted away. My father looked down at his shoes. The judge leaned forward, voice sharp. Mrs. Whitfold, is there something you'd like to explain to this court? My mother clenched her jaw. But before she could answer, someone in the back of the courtroom stood up. A woman, older, familiar in a way I couldn't place. She stepped forward, eyes on me. "I can explain," she said quietly. "I know what they did. I know what Adrian promised them, and I know why they abandoned you." The entire room turned. My stomach dropped, because I recognized her face, only faintly, from the foster home photos Adrian kept in his study. The judge frowned. "And you are?" The woman took a deep breath, eyes brimming with something between guilt and sadness. "I'm the social worker who handled Grace's case the day she was abandoned." My breath vanished. She looked straight at me. "And I've been keeping a secret for 26 years. When the woman stepped forward, the entire courtroom seemed to tilt in her direction, like the weight of her secret pulled us all into her orbit. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I just stared at her. This woman with gray-streaked hair pulled into a bun, soft lines around her eyes, and a look on her face that made my skin prickle. It wasn't just sadness. It was recognition. It was history. "Your name, please," the judge said, leaning forward. The woman swallowed. "My name is Alice Marin, Your Honor. I worked as a child welfare social worker for 28 years. One of the cases I handled was Grace Whitfold, on the day she was abandoned." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused. My biological parents stiffened. My mother's lips pressed thin. My father gripping the bench nervously. My pulse hammered in my chest so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I remembered that day vaguely, fragments of her face, flashes of her voice, pieces of a memory that felt more like fog than truth. But now, here she was, standing in front of me again with 26 years of silence behind her. "Miss Marin," the judge said, "approach." The woman walked slowly toward the stand, each step deliberate, as though she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. When she sat and took the oath, I could see her hands trembling slightly. Not the kind of tremble you get from fear of public speaking. No, this was the tremble of someone about to finally speak a truth they'd buried too long. The judge folded her hands. "You stated you have information regarding the defendant's abandonment. Please explain." Alice Marin exhaled shakily. "For years, I've carried guilt over what happened. I knew eventually this day would come, especially after Dr. Adrian Whitfold passed away. I knew the truth couldn't remain buried forever." She looked at me then, directly at me, with eyes that seemed to say, "I'm so sorry." My stomach twisted. "Start from the beginning," the judge instructed. Alice nodded. "I was the one who received the call from mall security that a young girl had been wandering alone and crying for over an hour. When I arrived, Grace was sitting with a stuffed lion clutched to her chest. She was shaking, terrified, asking for her parents." Her voice cracked. "When I approached her, she asked me the same question again and again. Why did Mommy and Daddy leave me?" The courtroom was painfully silent. My mother shifted in her seat, face tight. My father avoided eye contact. "At first," Alice continued, "I believed it was a simple child-lost situation, but then mall security informed me that 2 adults, matching the parents' description, had been seen leaving the building quickly, without looking back." My throat thickened. I gripped the armrest tightly, fighting the urge to scream. "When we brought Grace into temporary custody, I followed protocol. We contacted the last known address on file for the parents, but—" She paused, her voice turning bitter. "The number was disconnected. Their address was empty. They were gone." My attorney leaned forward. The judge remained stone-faced. Alice looked down at her hands. "But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part came when I reviewed their file in the system, because there was already a termination of parental rights form submitted 3 months earlier, signed by both parents. But there was no follow-up, no home evaluation, no placement plan. It was just filed away, quietly." My mother flinched. My father's face drained of color. I sat frozen, my heart thudding painfully in my ears. "I contacted the department supervisor," Alice continued. "She told me something that made my stomach drop. She said the parents had come in months earlier with a strange request. They wanted to terminate parental rights, but not fully relinquish access. They said someone was planning to adopt Grace and that they wanted the process to be clean and simple. She looked directly at my biological parents. But when I asked them who the prospective adoptive parent was, they refused to answer. My mother shot to her feet. "That's a lie! We never—" "Sit down," the judge snapped. My mother slowly lowered herself, shooting daggers at the social worker. Alice took a shaky breath and continued. When I pressed the supervisor further, she said something else, something that made me suspicious enough to begin documenting everything privately. She looked at the judge. The parents mentioned a name. They didn't say it outright, but they implied it. Something about the doctor who promised them everything. My heart stopped. My mind scraped against the inside of my skull for answers. "The doctor," I whispered. "Adrian?" Alice nodded slowly, her eyes softening with empathy. I didn't know who they meant at the time. I left the cafe with a storm inside me, rain drizzling softly on my face. My thoughts whirled. How could I confront this? How could I stand up to a sister who had undermined me for years without any fear of consequence? As I walked home, a memory surfaced. A text message I had received last year, supposedly from a recruiter congratulating me on a new project. I remembered replying excitedly, only to have the offer rescinded without explanation. At the time, I had blamed myself, thinking maybe I wasn't qualified, maybe I wasn't good enough. But now, I realized Cassidy had sent that fake message herself, testing me, undermining me. She had been systematically dismantling my confidence, piece by piece. The next day at work, I decided I needed proof. I dug through emails, HR reports, messages, and anything I could find that connected Cassidy to the sabotage. It wasn't easy. She had been careful, leaving almost no trace. But I noticed patterns. Anonymous complaints sent right after her visits to my office, emails with her IP masked, small manipulations in internal communications. My stomach churned. How long had she been doing this? How long had I been struggling under her shadow, believing my failures were my own? By the time the clock hit 5 p.m., I had collected enough circumstantial evidence to confront her, enough to start reclaiming my life. That evening, I called Elena. "I have everything," I said, voice trembling but determined. "I can finally face her." She exhaled, a mix of relief and concern. "Be careful, she's dangerous when cornered." I nodded. "I know, but I can't keep hiding. I can't let her win anymore." We made a plan. Elena would come with me when I confronted Cassidy, making sure I wasn't alone. But inside, I knew the confrontation wouldn't be easy. Cassidy had a way of turning every argument back on me, of making me feel guilty even when I was right. I steeled myself. I couldn't afford to falter this time. The next day, I drove to Cassidy's new house. It was pristine, the kind of perfect suburban home that screamed success, approval, and control. Everything about her life looked flawless, just like she wanted it. I rang the doorbell, and Cassidy opened it immediately, her smile wide but forced. "Iris, what a surprise!" She stepped aside, letting me in, and my stomach twisted. I noticed the faint scent of candles and the gleam of freshly polished floors. Everything was curated, controlled. I swallowed. "Cassidy, we need to talk." Her smile faltered slightly. "About what?" I felt a surge of courage. "About what you've been doing to me for years." Her eyes narrowed, sharp, calculating. "Iris, I don't know what you mean." I held up my folder of evidence. Emails, HR reports, screenshots, dates, times, everything lined up in black and white. I mean this. Every anonymous complaint, every lie, every time you turned people against me. I know what you've done. Cassidy's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes flicked to the folder and back to me. Then she laughed, low, controlled, fake. So, you finally realized it. I was worried you'd never figure it out. My pulse surged. Why? I demanded. Why hurt me like this? Why sabotage my life? Her smile turned cold. Because you always had what I wanted. Attention, love, success. And you were going to take it all without thinking about me. I couldn't allow that. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Years of doubt, shame, humiliation, all of it distilled into this moment. And yet, for the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't shrink. I stood taller than I had in years. "Iris," she said slowly, "you'll never be stronger than me. You'll always be the weak one." I shook my head, finally understanding something fundamental. Strength wasn't about being the favorite. It wasn't about control or perfection. Strength was reclaiming your own power, and that's exactly what I was doing. As Cassidy stepped closer, her tone icy, a text buzzed on my phone. I glanced down and froze. Another anonymous message, same unsaved number, simple and terrifying. "She's not done. Prepare yourself. Tonight, she'll try to ruin everything, alone." The warning text still glowed on my phone as I stood in Cassidy's living room, heart hammering, palms slick with sweat. "She's not done. Prepare yourself. Tonight, she'll try to ruin everything, alone." I looked up at Cassidy, whose cold smile had not wavered. My chest tightened. She had always known how to intimidate, how to make people doubt themselves, and for a moment, I felt the old familiar panic creeping in. But then I remembered the hospital bed, the emptiness when my parents didn't show, the betrayal Elena revealed about Cassidy's sabotage at work, and a slow, steady rage replaced the fear. I was done being powerless. I took a deep breath. "Cassidy," I began, voice trembling but firm. "You've lied, manipulated, and sabotaged me for years. You've made people doubt me, made me doubt myself, and even hurt my career. And now I know everything. Why? Why do you feel the need to destroy the people closest to you just to stay on top?" Cassidy laughed, low and sharp. "Iris, you think it's about staying on top? It's about survival. Life isn't fair. Some of us have to fight to be seen. I did what I had to do." Her words were chilling because underneath that cold facade, she truly believed she was justified. "No," I said, stepping closer, holding my head high. "It's not survival. It's cruelty, and I'm done letting you dictate my life." She arched an eyebrow. "Done? You think it's that easy?" I ignored her and held up the folder of evidence I had collected. Emails, screenshots, HR notes, everything pointing to her lies. "Look at this, Cassidy. Do you really think you can control me anymore? I have proof. I know everything." Her eyes flicked over the folder, and for a split second, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Fear. But Cassidy was quick. She leaned in, voice low, dangerous. "Do you really think I'm the only one playing games here?" Confusion and dread mingled in my chest. What do you mean?" She smiled, that cold, calculated smile. "Nathan isn't the only one who knows my secrets. Your so-called best friend Elena, she has her own skeletons. And tonight, Iris, if you think you're safe confronting me alone, you're wrong." My stomach dropped. The pieces didn't fit. Elena had been with me, helping me. Had she betrayed me too? Cassidy watched my face carefully, delight flickering in her eyes. "You always trust too easily, little sister. That's why you've been easy to manipulate." My hands tightened around the folder, nails biting into the paper. I couldn't believe it. My heart raced, my mind spun with fear, betrayal, confusion. And yet, in the back of my head, a voice whispered, Focus. Remember who you are. You are not the same girl they tried to break." But later, after Grace was placed in foster care, a man came to visit her. A doctor. Dr. Adrian Whitfold. And when I saw him interact with her, it was different. He didn't look at her like a case. He looked at her like someone he already cared about. Tears stung my eyes. Alice continued, "I pulled him aside. I asked if he'd ever met the parents before. And do you know what he did?" She paused. He looked at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen and said, "I've known Grace longer than you think." A tremor ran down my back. The judge straightened. "Meaning?" Alice swallowed again. "Meaning, Dr. Whitfold knew the parents before Grace was abandoned. He knew them through his work. Her father, Henry, came to him years earlier as a patient." Gasps filled the room. My father's face contorted. My mother buried her face in her hands. I stared at them, horrified, waiting for the part that made sense. But the part that came next shattered whatever foundation I thought I had left. "During the appointment," Alice said, "Henry told him something. Something Adrian later confided to me after the adoption was finalized, because he feared it would matter someday." The judge leaned forward. "What did he say?" Alice looked at me again, her face full of sorrow. "Henry told Adrian that he and Maureen never wanted a child, that they had Grace by accident, and that when they discovered Adrian's medical research was about to pay off, they decided to cut a deal. They thought that if they got rid of Grace quietly and let Adrian adopt her, they could someday come back and claim a part of whatever he earned." My stomach lurched like I was falling off a cliff. I turned to my parents, my voice barely audible. "Is that true?" My father said nothing. My mother wiped a tear and whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Rage and grief mixed in my chest until I felt like I might explode. "So you abandoned me," I said in a shaking voice, "because you thought my adoptive father would become rich? You planned to come back for the money later?" My mother covered her face. My father clenched his fists. I felt like my heart was cracking open, spilling 26 years of unanswered questions. Alice wasn't finished. "There's more," she whispered. "After the abandonment, something happened that terrified me. A man came to the department asking about Grace's whereabouts. He said he worked for Henry and Maureen. He left when we refused to give information, but before he left, he said something chilling. 'Tell the doctor to keep his promise, or we'll come collect what's ours.' The entire courtroom went completely silent. My mouth went dry. My vision blurred. My attorney whispered, 'This is bigger than we thought.' Alice nodded grimly. I wanted to document it, but my supervisor told me to let it go. She said the parents were unfit and unstable, and that the department's priority was the child's safety. So I kept quiet. I let the adoption go through. But when the news of Adrian's illness came out 2 years ago, I became afraid. I feared that when he died, everything would resurface. And it has." The judge let out a long, heavy breath. "This is extraordinary." My parents looked like they were about to collapse. The judge turned to them. "Henry and Maureen Whitfold, you are now under investigation for potential fraud, coercion, and premeditated abandonment." My mother gasped. My father slammed his fist on the bench. But the judge wasn't done. She looked at me next. Her expression softened just slightly. "Miss Whitfold, this information may not only secure your inheritance, but it may reveal the full truth of your childhood. We need to dig deeper." My chest tightened, because as much as I wanted closure, something inside me trembled with fear. What more could there be? How much darker could the truth become? The judge looked at Alice. "Miss Marin, is there anything else you have been withholding?" Alice hesitated. Her eyes flicked nervously to me before she closed them briefly, as if gathering courage. When she opened them again, the guilt in her expression was unmistakable. "Yes," she whispered, "there's one last thing." The judge nodded for her to continue. Alice's voice quivered. "On the night Grace was abandoned, I found something in her backpack." My breath caught. The room leaned in. Something that didn't belong to her. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small, sealed plastic bag that looked old, wrinkled, worn from time. Inside was a folded slip of paper, yellowed with age. I froze. Alice held it up. "I kept it all these years because I knew it meant something. I believe it's time she sees it." The judge motioned her forward. Alice approached me slowly, her hands trembling as she placed the bag in my palm. I stared at it. The room faded. My ears rang. I opened the bag, unfolded the paper, and my world shattered. Because in shaky handwriting, clearly written by an adult, were the words, "Give her to him. He knows the truth. M." My heart stopped. M? My mother? Or someone else? The judge leaned forward. "Grace, what does it say?" I looked up, tears blurring my vision, voice trembling as I spoke. "It says, 'Give her to him. He knows the truth.'" My eyes darted to my parents. My mother gasped. My father froze. The judge's voice sharpened. "Who is him?" I swallowed hard. "It must be Adrian, my dad." The judge nodded. "Then the next question is—" She paused, her voice dropping with weight. "What truth did he know?" Before anyone could answer, my mother suddenly stood up, screaming, "Stop this! Stop all of this! She was never supposed to find out!" The judge pounded her gavel. "Order in the court!" My father grabs my mother's arm, trying to silence her, but she shook him off, her face breaking into a mix of panic and rage. "We did what we had to do," she cried. "He forced our hand." I stood up, shaking violently. "Who forced your hand? What truth are you talking about?" My mother opened her mouth, then hesitated, looking suddenly terrified, like someone was watching her. "We shouldn't say his name," she whispered. The judge leaned in. "Whose name?" My mother's voice cracked. "Grace, the man your adoptive father was afraid of, the man who made him promise, the man who wanted you gone." My heart collapsed in my chest. "Who? Who?" My mother finally spoke the name. "Your father's brother." The courtroom gasped. I froze. "My adoptive father's brother?" The judge's face drained of color. "Are you saying Dr. Whitfold's brother was involved?" My mother pressed her trembling hands to her mouth. "He was the reason we gave her up. He told us to." The judge slammed her gavel again. "And why would he do that?" My mother squeezed her eyes shut. "Because Grace wasn't supposed to survive." The world dropped out of under me. The courtroom felt like it had shrunk into a box that was vibrating with tension, my mother's scream still echoing in my ears. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling on the edge of the table as the words she'd just shouted sank into me. She was never supposed to find out. I swallowed hard, trying to force air into my lungs, trying to steady myself. The truth had been simmering beneath the surface for 26 years, and now it was spilling over, hot and bitter and impossible to ignore. I looked at my mother's face, twisted in panic, eyes wide, hands shaking, and for the first time I saw something I'd never noticed before. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. She had spent a lifetime trying to control the narrative, trying to make me feel like the victim of circumstances, but the mask was cracking. My father just sat frozen, hands clenched tightly on his knees, looking like a man realizing he had let the consequences of his choices reach a point of no return. I felt my throat tighten. The letter Adrian had left me, Alice Marin's testimony, the documents, everything had built up to this moment, and now, staring at the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, I realized that nothing about my childhood had been simple, nothing had been accidental, and everything I had believed about my parents' intentions was a lie. The judge pounded her gavel sharply, silencing the room. Mrs. Whitfold, Mr. Whitfold, this courtroom requires order. You may speak, but only in response to questions from this court. My mother's lips trembled, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might finally tell the truth. But instead, she opened her mouth and then closed it again, like she had swallowed some unbearable secret. My father glanced at her, a pleading look in his eyes, as if he were begging her not to destroy what little dignity they had left. And then he spoke, voice low and hesitant. "Your Honor, we only did what we thought was necessary." I froze. "Necessary?" my mind screamed. "Abandoning your 5-year-old child is necessary?" I could feel the anger coiling in my chest, hot and raw, but beneath it, a deeper ache, grief, the kind that comes from realizing that the people who are supposed to protect you can also betray you so completely. My voice was almost inaudible at first, but then it grew stronger. "Necessary?" I said, eyes locking on my mother. "You abandoned me. You left me in a mall, prying and scared. Because what? You thought someone else would give you money? You thought my life was a bargaining chip? Do you even hear yourselves?" The courtroom was silent except for my words, echoing off the walls. My parents flinched, but they did not answer. And that was the final betrayal, the confirmation that what they had done was deliberate, premeditated, and cruel. Alice Marin, the social worker who had kept my secrets safe for decades, cleared her throat and leaned forward. "Your Honor," she said softly, "the parents' own words in private documents, combined with their behavior during the abandonment, show a clear pattern of manipulation. They intended to use Grace as leverage against her adoptive father's future inheritance. This was not an accident." My attorney nodded vigorously. "Your Honor, we also have additional evidence, the correspondence between Adrian Whitfold and his legal team, indicating that he anticipated possible claims from the Whitfolds and took measures to protect Grace's interests. This demonstrates foresight and care on his part, not negligence." I felt a strange surge of warmth, even through the storm raging in my chest. My adoptive father had protected me, even in death, even when I had no idea how much danger had surrounded me as a child. Tears pricked my eyes. I remembered all the small moments, him reading to me at night, hiding money for my college fund, reassuring me during nightmares, moments I had always taken for granted. Now I understood the depth of his love. I could feel him in the room with me, silent but powerful, guiding me toward the truth I deserved. The judge leaned back slightly, studying my parents with a look that made my stomach clench. "Henry and Maureen Whitfold, based on the testimony and evidence presented today, the court finds substantial grounds to investigate allegations of premeditated abandonment and fraudulent claims to inheritance. While a full investigation will determine criminal and civil consequences, any claims to Mr. Whitfold's estate are suspended until further notice." My mother's face went pale. My father slumped further into his chair. For the first time in my life, the people who had held power over me felt powerless. My chest heaved as I absorbed the weight of it all. I wasn't a scared little girl anymore. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me again. After the court session, I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The sunlight was bright, almost blinding after hours of fluorescent courtroom lights. I took a deep breath, feeling the wind on my face, trying to shake off the adrenaline and the pain. Louise was waiting for me, leaning against her car with her arms crossed, a small, knowing smile on her face. I ran to her, wrapped her in a tight hug, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Relief. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, but tears slid down my cheeks. "I am now. I think I finally understand. It wasn't my fault. It never was. And I have the right to protect myself." We stood there silently for a moment, letting the wind and the noise of the city wash over us. And I realized that this was the first day I could breathe freely in years. The first day I could truly feel safe in my own skin. That night, I went home and pulled out the letter Daniel had left me again. I read it slowly, savoring every word, letting his voice echo in my mind. What they did was not your fault. It never was. Those words had never meant more to me than they did now. I placed the letter on my nightstand and sat quietly for a long time, thinking about my childhood, the abandonment, the fear, the lies, and how far I had come. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about acknowledging it, taking ownership of my story, and deciding how I would move forward. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And more than that, I was a young woman who had been given a second chance at her life, with the power to define herself. The next morning, I met with my attorney again to discuss the next steps. "Grace," he said, spreading documents across the table, "we're going to pursue full clarity on the inheritance, but more importantly, we're going to make sure your parents are held accountable for their actions." I nodded. I want that. I want the truth out there, and I want to make sure no one else ever experiences what I went through because of their manipulation. He smiled a little and said, "That's the right attitude. But remember, your focus isn't revenge, it's protection, empowerment, and your future." I thought about his words for a moment. Protection, empowerment, future. Those were exactly what I needed. I didn't need to destroy them emotionally or financially to feel whole. I needed to reclaim myself, reclaim my life, and move forward with purpose. I finally understood that. Weeks passed. The investigation revealed everything Alice Marin had testified. My parents' abandonment was intentional, manipulative, and connected to their greed for my adoptive father's future wealth. The court permanently suspended their claim to the estate. I received Daniel's inheritance, but more importantly, I received something far more valuable: closure. I confronted my biological parents once in the attorney's office, and they offered excuses, tears, and apologies. I listened, but I said nothing. I realized that words couldn't undo the years of betrayal, and they didn't deserve a place in my life anymore. I left that office with my head held high, feeling lighter than I had in decades. In the months that followed, I began to heal in ways I hadn't imagined. Therapy helped me unpack the trauma, Louise stayed by my side as a constant support, and I started to rebuild the parts of myself that had been shattered. I traveled, I focused on my career, and I invested in the kind of friendships that nourished me instead of draining me. And every now and then, I'd take out Daniel's letter, read it again, and feel his love surrounding me like a protective shield. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was alive, and I was free. My past no longer dictated my present. I had boundaries, I had clarity, and I had the courage to face whatever life threw my way. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Betrayal can shape you, but it doesn't define you. Only you get to define who you are, how you respond, and what you let into your life. Now, when I tell my story, I do it not just to unburden myself, but to reach anyone out there who has been left behind, lied to, or manipulated by the people they trusted most. I tell them that pain can be transformed into power, that grief can become growth, that the darkest chapters can lead to the brightest revelations if you allow yourself to heal, to set boundaries, and to reclaim your narrative. My parents will never understand me, never appreciate the strength it took for me to survive, and never be able to undo the choices they made. And that is their loss, not mine. I walk through the world now with my head high, carrying both the weight and the lessons of my past, determined to live fully, fiercely, and unapologetically. And so, as I close this chapter of my life, I look at the camera, or the audience, and I ask you, have you ever faced betrayal by the people you loved most? How did you reclaim your power? Share your story in the comments. Because the truth is, even when life breaks you, even when the people who are supposed to protect you fail, your story doesn't end there. It continues. It becomes your voice, your strength, and your legacy.